Now I'm going to speak about the events in Ukraine and the growing splits among the Western elites on the national and international levels. Destabilization of the situation in the United States of America, European Union, Japan, that largely exceeds the reasonable limits of the state budget deficiency, decreasing of the life standard, and huge unemployment in a number of countries. Complicated material position of broad strata of the population in the vast majority of countries of the world is not the result of external intervention as well as the legal result of expression of the crisis, both in the center and in the periphery of the capitalist system. It demonstrates the inability for progressive self-renovation, and soon one can even mean survival, in the conditions of immaturity factors of alternative models of social development. This also explains the split of the elite, part of which directly witnesses the necessity of the interformation revolution, and the other part is ready to continue the former course or establish the open dictatorship if necessary. Let us address the cardinal revolution of value and rejection of militant neoconservatism by Zbigniew Brzezinski in his latest monograph, Strategic Insight, published in 2012. American economist James Galbraith wrote in his article, "For Brzezinski, doing damage to Russia is a hobby." But in his book, Brzezinski believes that the West must conclude the long-term strategic union with Russia and Turkey, otherwise it can turn into global isolation. The central thesis of his book is that the USA is in the same situation which the Soviet Union met in the 80s of the 20th century. Brzezinski notes that, a quotation, "There are several alarming similarities between the Soviet Union in the years just prior to its fall and the America of the early 21st century." Among these similarities, Brzezinski names increasingly gridlocked government system incapable of enacting serious policy revisions, self-bankruptcy by committing an inordinate percentage of its GNP to military goals, the economic crisis, and the deterioration of the quality of life. The ruling class became cynically insensitive to widening social disparities while hypocritically making its own privileged lifestyle, and finally, in foreign affairs, it became increasingly self-isolated. In 2013, the monograph of Nobel laureate and former Vice President of the United States, Al Gore, named The Future was published. As a result of research of the problem of the modern society, the researcher has made the unfavorable conclusion regarding the possibility of the American establishment to solve the existing problems. The inability of American democracy to make difficult decisions is now threatening the nation's economic future, and with it the ability of the world system to find a pathway forward a sustainable future. Both political parties, Democrats and Republicans, have become so dependent on business lobbies for the large sums of money they must have to purchase television advertisements in order to be re-elected, that special interest legislation pushed by the industries most active in purchasing influence, financial services, carbon-based energy companies, pharmaceutical companies, and others can count on large bipartisan majorities. The weak state of democratic decision-making in the USA and the enhanced control over American democracy by the forces of wealth and corporate power have paralyzed the ability of the country to make rational decisions in favor of policies that would remedy these problems. These two trends unfortunately reinforce one another. The more control over democratic decision-making by powerful wealthy interests, the more they are able to ensure that decisions on policy enhance their wealth and power. This classic positive feedback loop makes inequality steadily worse, even as it makes solutions for inequality less accessible. Such remarks of Al Gore are very up to date. So, Paul Craig Roberts, an American economist and the former Assistant Secretary of the Treasury in the Reagan administration, predicts the US economic failure in 2014. This year could also see the breakup of NATO and even the European Union. Washington, reckless coup in Ukraine, emphasizes Paul Craig Roberts, and threat of sanctions against Russia have pushed its NATO puppet states into dangerous ground. Washington misjudged the reaction in Ukraine to its overthrow of the elected democratic government and imposition of a stooge government, considers Paul Craig Roberts. Such rather numerous claims of critically thinking representatives of the American elite witness the deep crisis among the upper circles of the American society, as well as degradation of their intellectual and moral level, and an inability to solve serious problems in public development. One of the signs of the crisis among the elite is withdrawal of capitals to offshore zones. Among other things, it caused a situation where the USA now is lagging behind Monaco, Liechtenstein, Luxembourg, and several other offshore areas by several times, while it was among the leaders in the GDP per capita 20 years ago. The ruling circles evidently losing their capacity to control the situation in the United States and outside, which logically leads the country to the national crisis and the right-wing dictatorship at the end, or revolution, about which one can find our publications not only in the left radical editions. Discussions of scenarios of the whole national crisis and the prospects of the American Revolution in 2014 by well-known representatives of mass media and the CIA looks quite symbolically on air at Fox News in 2009, and this revolution could be much more radical than the imagination expectations of the observers predict just now. And the complicated issue of the role of the US Army arises in conditions of the oncoming crisis, as because of the control over democratic decision-making by powerful, wealthy interests makes solutions for inequality less acceptable, according to Al Gore, and the crisis is about to grow. This issue is not unoccupied and is far from rhetoric nature now. If the crisis is developed in the leading nuclear country of the world, what threats will arise for the country and the rest of the world because of that? Measures are taken not to lock the socially oriented way out of the crisis by oligarchic clans supported with reactionary circles of the army, but to provide its natural development within the scope of the democratic process supported by citizens in the uniform. It has to be solved by the Americans themselves, supported with the traditions of their great revolutionary past, but being aimed to the future. Today, the USA has the highest research, technical and industrial potential in the world, which allows them to step into this future among the first. It also can deprive itself and the whole mankind of the future in the flame of the World War. The position of Barack Obama regarding implementation of possibilities of the provocation in Ukraine is also affected with the opportunistic interests of various segments of the American business. Thus, part of the American elite doesn't mind reaching agreements with Iran, having gained access to its big and growing domestic market, not only European BP and any, a major part of business of which is associated with Russia, lobbies a moderate reaction to the position regarding the Ukrainian issue, but also, for example, American Exxon, which is developing its strategic partnership with Rosneft. Part of the elite is ready to trade with Russia and China regarding the smooth distribution of roles within the scope of transient world order. Literally all American business and political elite doesn't want the world war in the absence of obvious safety for itself, and that is why it is ready to find compromises. Barack Obama demonstrates not helplessness, but a certain art of maneuvering between the different fractions of the elite in conditions of growing dissatisfaction of most Americans with the general situation in the country. Moreover, it is well known about bad ends of presidents of the USA that lost the feeling of the permissible scope. Another thing is that no art of maneuvering rejects the need for drastic new approaches and solutions. The depth of split among the elite is well remarkable by directly opposite opinions of the highest military and intelligence experts, heads of agencies, the NATO and the European Union. For example, practically at the same time, the head of military intelligence of the European Union, Georgy Fuzov, stated that there is neither Russian army nor citizens of Russia in eastern Ukraine in the interview of the Finnish TV and radio company Yell on April 15th. I do not believe that the Russian army is involved into this conflict. The people that permanently reside in the territory of the eastern Ukraine and are dissatisfied with the present state of affairs in the country take part in the civil unrest. In less than 2 days, the chief of the joint NATO forces in Europe, US General Philip Breedlove, stated exactly the opposite. Actions of perfectly trained Russian special army units are behind the protests in Ukraine. They perform effective sweeping of office buildings, put roadblocks there of the excellent command of weapons that civilians cannot display. Of course, the general was unaware of the fact that nationalists and neo-Nazis in the government had dismissed the special internal affairs ministry unit called Berkut for shooting at people at the Maidan, and part of its employees were put on trial. It's a questionable trial. He also was unaware of the fact that most Ukrainian special forces of the Department of Defense was also in the mood to protect the criminal regime which was displayed on the first days of the anti-terrorist operation. In particular, that is why there are enough representatives of special forces and reserve officers who did not accept a coup in Kiev among the rebels in the east. They know how to fight and they have something to defend. They are supported by the majority of the population of the southeast, particularly after the attempt of involvement of army units with tanks and airplanes, the attempt that was blocked up at dozens of places by local residents, which is witnessed by the majority of video reports on the internet, and especially after the tragic events in Odessa. It should be noted that the statement of Mr. Malafuzov has only been posted in a number of national media and on various left-wing websites, and the position of General Breedlove had been distributed via leading informational channels of the West in the European Union countries and has been highlighted much more intensively. As for April the 20th, the OSCE mission in Donbass found no traces of presence of the Russian army there. Is there an alternative to the blood scenario in Ukraine? A couple of weeks ago it was, now it is difficult to imagine it under the current government in Kiev. The regime cannot and doesn't want to bring social progress to the land of Ukraine. In Ukraine we see not an ethnic conflict, but a deep economic, social and political crisis of oligarchic capitalism, and this crisis is aggravated by imperialist interference. So Kiev it will lose the rest of its legitimate character and support of the population. It is caught in lies and corruption, which is noted in liberal Kiev media. It is responsible for inciting ethnic and social strife in Ukraine. The country is at the threshold of an economic disaster. Probably the wave of people's dissatisfaction is growing, which will sweep away the regime not only in the east, but also in the territory of all Ukraine. More active role of the armed forces in the Ukraine is quite possible. It is naive to assume that the army will observe political neutrality when social development reaches a crisis, and it quite necessary as a practical unit between the Kiev Provisional Government, progressive civil forces, and the democratically mined circles of the army. The coordination of the activities, which really exists on a local level in some regions to make the process of liquidation of pro-oligarchic corrupted system more peaceful and to prevent any chance for a successful reactionary coup d'etat. Predictable the attempt of Kiev regime to liquidate the former active militants of Maidan, which are full of disappointment from passivity of the authorities against corruption and anti-democratic reforms of the regime, and it opens the way for broader anti-regime coalitions of the west and east of Ukraine. If the victory over the comprador forces and the extreme right-wing sector, the latter are now in the minority even in the western Ukraine, will be achieved as a result of people's demonstrations, strikes, and support of the democratically minded part of the law enforcement structures, armed forces, it will not only result in the victory of democracy in Ukraine, but also in a serious crisis of the reactionary circles in the United States. Russia must become the guarantor of not application of force against the people, and such choice must be made by the Ukrainians themselves. This option will inevitably cause further destabilization of the global empire, stimulate the process of radical changes in the USA and the whole world, including Russia. Hopefully the changes to be progressive and democratic ones. However, it can turn into the open form of right-wing dictatorship in the United States and in a number of other countries, as compared to which the McCarthy's times will seem liberal paradise. Time will show. Thank you for your attention.